Outlaw's son Cole Dalton was running from his father's blood-soaked gang when he found her, a preacher's daughter, beaten and abandoned at Devil's Creek, half dead in a torn white dress. The last thing he needed was to fall in love with everything he'd been raised to destroy. Cole Dalton had been riding hard for 2 days, putting miles between himself and the Dalton gang's latest bloody bank job. At 23, he was already sick of being his father's boy, tired of waking up with other folks' screams ringing in his ears. The river crossing at Devil's Creek was supposed to be his last stop before vanishing into Mexico forever. That's when he spotted her, a splash of white against the dark mud of the riverbank, still as death, crumpled like a broken doll that someone had tossed aside and forgotten. She couldn't have been more than 20, with golden hair now tangled with dirt and blood. Her simple white dress, the kind church girls wore to Sunday meetings, was ripped at the shoulder and stained with mud and worse. Dark bruises covered her pale skin like storm clouds rolling across a summer sky. Cole climbed down slow, his hand never leaving his gun. In his world, bodies by rivers usually meant trouble, meant someone hiding in the rocks with a rifle. But as he got closer, he saw her chest rising and falling, heard the soft whisper of breath between cracked lips. She was alive, barely. Her heartbeat fluttered under his fingers like a wounded bird. When he lifted her head gentle-like and touched water from his canteen to her lips, her eyes opened, blue as a summer sky, blue as everything pure he'd never been allowed to touch. For a moment, those blue eyes went wide with terror. She saw his guns, his hard face, the darkness that hung around him like smoke. And something changed. Maybe it was the gentleness in his hands, or the way he spoke like he was praying instead of cursing. "Easy now," Cole whispered, his voice rougher than he meant. "You're safe. What happened to you?" "Man," she managed, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. "They wanted to know where Father hides the church money. When I wouldn't tell them—" Her voice broke, but her eyes never left his face, searching for something she'd never found in any man before. Cole's jaw got tight. He knew about men who hurt women for gold. Hell, he'd grown up around them, but seeing what that cruelty had done to her made something cold and deadly move in his chest. "I'm Cole," he said, not mentioning the last name that would make her run screaming if she had the strength. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah McKenna." McKenna. Cole knew that name. Reverend Thomas McKenna, the fire and brimstone preacher who'd been trying to bring God's word to every God-forsaken corner of the territory. The man who preached that outlaws like the Dalton gang were devils walking the earth, deserving nothing but rope and judgment. The smart thing would be to ride away, leave her for someone else to find, someone whose daddy hadn't spent 20 years spilling blood across 3 states, someone who deserved to touch something that pure and broken and beautiful. But broken people know broken people, and something in Sarah's eyes called to the part of him that his father hadn't been able to kill yet. "Can you ride?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She could barely sit up, let alone stay in a saddle. Without waiting for her to answer, he lifted her as careful as he'd handle a wounded bird, feeling how light she was, how fragile. He settled her across his saddle, then took the reins and started walking. His horse was strong enough to carry them both, but Sarah needed gentleness more than speed. As they moved away from the river crossing, she drifted in and out, sometimes whispering prayers, sometimes just breathing his name. Cole knew of a place, an old trapper's cabin hidden in a valley where no one would think to look. It wasn't much, but it had walls, a roof, and a well with clean water. More importantly, it was far enough from both his daddy's territory and her father's church that they could disappear for a while. The cabin was rough but clean, with a stone fireplace and a single room that held a bed, a table, and not much else. Cole laid Sarah on the bed, covering her with his own coat because she was shivering despite the warm day. By lamplight, he cleaned her wounds with water heated over the fire and strips of cloth torn from his extra shirt. She winced when he touched the worst bruises, but she never pulled away. Her eyes stayed on his face, studying him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're not what I expected," she said soft, as he bandaged a cut on her forehead. "What did you expect?" "A monster," she said simply. "When I saw your guns, your face, I thought you were one of them coming back to finish what they started. But your hands are gentle, and you have kind eyes when you think I'm not looking." Cole's hands went still. No one had ever called me gentle. No one had ever looked for kindness in my eyes and claimed to find it. "You don't know who I am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me," Sarah replied, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Tell me who you are when nobody's watching." If you're already hooked on this forbidden love story, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss how it ends. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love hearing from viewers around the world. For 3 days, they lived in a world of two. Sarah grew stronger under Cole's careful tending, and something neither of them had names for grew stronger between them. He told her stories of places he'd seen, dreams he'd had before his father taught him that dreams were for weaker men. She told him about books she'd read, about a God who forgave even the worst sinners, about a future where people could choose who they became. "My father says outlaws don't have souls," Sarah said one evening as they shared beans and hardtack by the fire, "that they're born wrong, born evil." Cole's jaw went tight. Maybe he's right. "No," Sarah said, firm, reaching across the small space between them to touch his hand. "Evil doesn't tend wounds. Evil doesn't give up its coat to keep someone warm. Evil doesn't look at a broken woman and see something worth saving." Her touch was fire and salvation all at once. Cole had never known that gentleness could be so powerful, that someone could look at his scarred hands and see something worth holding instead of something to fear. "Sarah," he started, then stopped. How could he tell her that she was light in a world that had only shown him darkness? How could he explain that 3 days with her had made him want to be the man she saw when she looked at him? "I know," she whispered, reading the words he couldn't say. "I feel it too." Their first kiss was soft as prayer, careful as hope. She tasted like everything good he'd never been allowed to have, and when she didn't pull away, when she leaned into him instead, Cole felt something crack open in his chest that had been locked away for years. The sound of horses coming fast shattered their peaceful world like gunshots through glass. Cole was on his feet in a heartbeat, gun in hand, moving to the window. Through the trees he could see riders coming. Too many riders, moving too fast. "Stay down," he told Sarah, but she was already moving, her face pale but steady. "It's my father," she said, knowing the lead horse. "Someone must have told him I was missing." Reverend Thomas McKenna sat his horse like an avenging angel, his black coat and stern face burning with righteous fury. Behind him rode 6 men from his church, all armed, all looking ready for a fight. The preacher's eyes found the cabin and burned with the fire of a man who'd found his daughter in the devil's own den. Cole stepped onto the cabin's small porch, his hands visible but ready. Sarah followed despite his warnings, her chin raised with the same stubborn courage that had kept her alive by the river. "Father," she said, her voice steadied despite the tension crackling in the air. "Sarah Elizabeth McKenna," the Reverend's voice boomed like thunder from the pulpit. "Step away from that man. Step away from that spawn of Satan before his evil taints your soul." Instead of stepping away, Sarah moved closer to Cole, her shoulder touching his arm. The move was small, but it spoke louder than shouts. She was choosing her place, and it was beside him. "He saved my life, Father," Sarah said, quiet. "The men who beat me, who left me to die, he found me. He cared for me. He protected me." "Protected you?" The Reverend's voice rose to a roar. "Child, do you not know who this is? This is Cole Dalton, son of Blackjack Dalton, heir to a bloody legacy written in blood and damnation. He's poison, Sarah, poison in the shape of a man." Sarah's face went white. Cole felt her stiffen beside him, felt the moment when his name hit her like a physical blow. Everyone in the territory knew about Blackjack Dalton and his gang. Everyone knew the stories of banks robbed, towns terrorized, innocent people killed. "Sarah," Cole said, soft, not looking at her because he couldn't bear to see the fear and disgust that would surely be in her eyes now. "I was going to tell you." "When?" she whispered. "When were you going to tell me my father was right, that you're exactly what he said you were?" The space she put between them felt like a canyon. Cole's heart, which had just learned to hope, crumbled like old stone. This was always how it was going to end. He'd been a fool to think otherwise. "Sarah, come home," Reverend McKenna commanded, his voice gentler now that he saw doubt in his daughter's eyes. "Come home where you belong, away from this poison." Cole stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. "Go," he said, quiet. "Go home, Sarah. Your father's right. You deserve better than a Dalton. You always did." Sarah stood frozen between two worlds, two ways of seeing herself. Behind her father waited everything safe and familiar, the church, the community, the life she'd always known. Beside Cole stood the unknown, dangerous and exciting, a future that could destroy her or set her free. Before she could speak, before she could choose, the thunder of more horses filled the valley. But these weren't church riders. These men rode hard and fast, with guns already drawn and violence in their eyes. Blackjack Dalton rode at the head of his gang like death itself, his dark coat flowing behind him, his eyes cold as winter stars. He was everything Cole might become if he stopped fighting his blood. Cruel, merciless, carved from violence, and empty of anything resembling mercy. "Well, well," Blackjack called out, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't shoot. "Found you at last, boy. Been wondering where you disappeared to." Cole moved fast, placing himself between his father and Sarah, between the gang and the church riders. His gun was in his hand without thinking, trained not on the preacher's men, but on his own blood. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Ride away." Blackjack's laugh was like breaking glass. "Doesn't concern me? Son, everything you do concerns me, especially when you're playing house with the preacher's little dove." His eyes found Sarah, and she shrank back from the naked evil in them. "Mighty pretty bird you caught yourself, boy. Shame to waste her on just one man." Something snapped in Cole's chest. All his life he'd been afraid of becoming his father. Now, for the first time, he was afraid not being strong enough to stop him. "You touch her, and I'll kill you myself." "Will you now?" Blackjack's smile widened. "That's my boy. Knew the blood would tell eventually." Reverend McKenna, seeing the gang's intentions, understanding for the first time that his daughter faced a threat far worse than a young outlaw's misguided feelings, made a choice that surprised everyone. "Sarah," he said quiet, "get behind Cole. Stay close to him." Sarah's eyes widened, but she understood. Her father was choosing the lesser evil, trusting the son to protect her from the father. She moved back to Cole's side, and this time, when her shoulder touched his, it felt like coming home. The valley filled with tension thick enough to cut. Church riders with their righteous fury, outlaws with their casual violence, and in the center, a young man who was about to choose which legacy he would claim. "Here's what's gonna happen," Blackjack said, his voice easy as if talking about the weather. "You're gonna give us the girl. We're gonna have ourselves some fun. Then we're gonna burn that little church of yours to the ground, preacher man, and you're gonna watch." "No," Cole said simple. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything. "I'm done being your son. I'm done being a Dalton, and I'm done letting you hurt innocent people." Sarah's hand found his free one, her fingers locking with his. She wasn't choosing safety. She wasn't choosing her father's approval. She was choosing love whatever the cost. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he confirmed. The first shot came from Black Jack's gun, aimed at his own son's heart. Cole dove sideways, pulling Sarah with him as the valley exploded into violence. Church riders and outlaws opened fire, the peaceful cabin becoming a battlefield where righteousness and evil finally met in smoke and thunder. Cole fought like a man defending everything he'd ever loved, his gun speaking in sharp, decisive sentences. Sarah, far from the helpless church mouse everyone expected, proved she had steel in her spine, reloading weapons and watching his back with fierce determination. The fight was brutal and brief. Church riders fell, but outlaws fell faster. Cole's knowledge of his father's ways, combined with the righteous fury of men protecting their community, began to turn the tide. One by one, the Dalton gang was cut down until only the father and son remained, facing each other across a valley painted with gun smoke and blood. "Shoulda killed you when you were born," Black Jack snarled, blood running from a wound in his shoulder. "Shoulda known you'd turn out weak like your mother." "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," Cole replied, his gun steady despite the emotion in his voice. "She loved a monster and still managed to raise a man." Black Jack raised his gun with a roar of rage, but age and wounds had slowed him. Cole's shot was clean, merciful in its quickness. His father fell backward into the dust, his eyes already growing glassy. "You'll never escape what you are," Black Jack whispered with his last breath. "Dalton blood don't change." "Maybe not," Cole said quiet, holstering his gun, "but Dalton choices can." When the smoke cleared, when the dead were counted and the wounded tended, Sarah and Cole stood together in the ruins of their separate worlds. The preacher looked at his daughter, seeing a woman who had chosen her own path and found strength he never knew she possessed. "I was wrong about you," Reverend McKenna said to Cole, his voice heavy with the weight of new understanding. "I judged you by your father's sins instead of your own choices. Can you forgive an old man's blindness?" Cole nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Acceptance from Sarah's father felt like forgiveness he'd never dared to hope for. "The question," the Reverend continued, "is what happens now? You've made enemies of every outlaw gang in the territory. And Sarah?" He looked at his daughter with love and sorrow. "You can't come home unchanged. The congregation would never accept you after this." Sarah stepped forward, her hand still in Cole's. "Then we'll make our own home," she said simple. "Somewhere we can start fresh, where Cole can be the man he chooses to be, instead of the man his father wanted." "California," Cole said sudden. "I hear there's gold in California and land for people willing to work it. Clean land where nobody knows the name Dalton." They spent the next day getting ready for a journey that would take them far from everything they'd ever known. The surviving church riders gave supplies, horses, even a small amount of money, their way of blessing a union their preacher had approved not with words, but with acceptance. As they got ready to leave the cabin where their love had been born, Sarah turned to take one last look at the place that had changed everything. "Regrets?" Cole asked, seeing the look on her face. "None," she said firm. "This is where I learned that love isn't safe. It's not easy, but it's worth fighting for." They rode west as the sun painted the sky in shades of promise. Two souls who had found each other in the darkest moments and chosen light. Behind them lay everything they'd been. Ahead waited everything they could become. 6 months later, in a green valley in California, where no one cared about the sins of fathers or the expectations of preachers, Sarah Dalton tended a garden while her husband built fences around land that belonged to them. She was no longer the preacher's sheltered daughter, and he was no longer the outlaw's reluctant son. They were simply Sarah and Cole, a woman and a man who had learned that love isn't something that happened to you. It was something you chose every day, despite fear and despite the whole world telling you it was impossible. When Sarah placed Cole's hand on her growing belly and told him they were going to have a baby, he wept, not from sorrow as he had so many times in his old life, but from joy so pure it felt like being reborn. "What will we name him?" Cole asked, his voice soft with wonder. "Hope," Sarah said without hesitation. "We'll name him Hope, because that's what love gave us when we thought we had nothing left." And in that green valley, far from river crossings and father's sins, they built a life that proved the greatest truth of all. Broken people don't stay broken when they choose to heal each other. Did this story of forbidden love and redemption touch your heart? Subscribe for more tales where love conquers all odds. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what Western love story you'd like to see next. Your support helps us bring these emotional journeys to life.